going to do before we go back to the showcases, to the project showcases and the country specifics, is we're actually going to now dive into a panel session, and the panel session is going to focus on the investors themselves and what they're looking for. Ultimately, we can have all the plans in the world, but we need an investor maybe that isn't necessarily the government to come in and to help us realize our ambitions. So Marcel is going to moderate this particular session. And yeah, I think Marcel will introduce the panelists, so I'll invite him to come up and take his seat and then introduce the panelists and welcome to the stage. So Marcel is back, thank you. See you, man.
I'm going to mention why I believe it's interesting that we have these people on the panel today and what it can offer to all of you in the audience. This panel is obviously building on the earlier setting of the scene around the real estate opportunity in Africa. And we'd like to delve a little bit deeper into how can we as airports or as an industry capitalize on some of these opportunities. I think the presentations made clear that the opportunities are there, the economic forces are driving the growth of air cargo, of demand for air services, and that means there are investment opportunities. So then let's ask the investors what opportunities they see and how do they think that these can be capitalized on. From your left to right, we've got Errol Taylor, who's with Growthpoint Properties. Growthpoint Properties is one of the largest listed real estate investors in South Africa, probably one of the largest in the African continent, active across various sectors of real estate development. Next, we have Moritz Thompson with Africa Infrastructure Investment Managers, AIIM, based in Cape Town. Also a large infrastructure investor on the continent, active in the airports industry, but also in different infrastructure and services industries. And Khangi Khoza from Swissport South Africa, a well-known brand, I think, in the aviation industry, obviously known for ground handling, cargo handling, and perhaps less well known as an investor in the infrastructure space or the real estate space. So perhaps that's a good place to start. Would you tell us a little bit about the Swissport perspective on how do you see real estate opportunities and what would be interesting real estate opportunities for you at airports?
Sure. So thanks, Marcel, and thank you very much to Aviation and to John and his team for having us here, and very grateful to be back in one of my favorite African countries, Namibia. Any excuse to come here is a welcome one. So seeing that I'm the only operator on the panel, I thought it's very important to be quite specific about, what we look for as Swissport. So obviously we look for the lay of the land, and I think infrastructure is a very important antidote to that. But to perhaps take a step back, our customers are actually airlines, right? And I think we look at where our airline customers are headed, the countries they fly to, what sort of goods they take in there, and what their demands are. And from there, we sort of build our own internal business case in terms of how we develop our operations. So just a couple of points in terms of what we look for. So obviously, route networks for our airlines are very important. And then we look for capacity, right? Whether it be belly capacity, in terms of the integration between passenger and the cargo operations. We look at things that, the type of volumes we can take in and out of a country. We then look at things like what is the setup within the different airports, whether there's airside access for cargo operations, the distance between the cargo precinct as well as, the passenger side of things. But then we also look for warehouse capacity. Space is a commodity in our environment. It's, we cannot emphasize the need for good cargo infrastructure, but also for the availability of space. Because as the airlines evolve, as their need for, to fly into certain places evolves, we tend to find that they grow at an exponential rate and we cannot be held back by space. Now, if you speak to an audience that operates outside of Africa, that almost seems, obvious, but you and I both know how challenging that can be in the African context. And then, of course, we look at regulation. So the Civil Aviation Authority, how closely they work with the airport operator, what the rules are, what the rules of operating are. Those are quite important because, it also limits what we can and can't bring into the country and how we process those through our warehouses. And then, of course, things like customs and the clearance process and how well that works. And then specifically, in terms of the operation, we look at things like the growth market segments. So what exactly is being brought into and out of the country, and what are the requirements around that? So, there's some specialized facilities that are required for e-commerce, for perishables, for pharmaceutical products. Both these three areas are very important growth segments for us in South Africa, for example, and I believe in Southern Africa across the board. You spoke earlier in your presentation with Nelly about the flower corridor in Nairobi, for example, and we know Nairobi is a very big cargo hub. And, as a result of responding to those market requirements, Swissport in Nairobi as well has developed their own farmer corridor to not break the cold chain for the flowers market. And then we look at transport nodes as well, the accessibility of different, transport corridors, how far away they are to the airport and how close they are, and how you respond to that. In South Africa, we have a road feeder service, so that's one of the ways we respond to an airline's inability to reach certain markets. So you can fly into Johannesburg, for example, and we will truck the goods further on to whether it be Port Elizabeth, Durban, and in some cases Cape Town, though nowadays it works the other way around. So I'll leave it there for now.
Okay, great. So then in terms of the real estate that you would look at, it's really the real estate that you would be interested in operating given those market conditions if the opportunity for the cargo is there, right?
Definitely. So, we look at greenfield, brownfield, M&A projects, but all these things that I discussed previously are sort of the dynamics in that market. And I think particularly in Africa, each country has its own separate dynamics. I think it's very important that you have a synergy amongst the various different players because it also impacts your ability to move quicker on certain projects. But definitely in terms of real estate, we then look at how, it feeds into all of that.
Sure. Okay. Thanks. Moving on to you, Errol, from Growthpoint's perspective, what makes real estate opportunities at airports interesting? Why would you look at those?
Thank you. So I think more specifically, airports are very specific type functionality hubs. And because of that, they're not plentiful. So it provides a unique opportunity for you to do a real estate investment. And more specifically, it allows an opportunity for you to establish a strong relationship with an established entity, being an airport, where you have a transport hub. And transport hubs are essentially dominated by passengers and people and cargo. And so the more people, the more passengers, the more cargo, the greater the economic activity associated with that particular node. And of course, that provides an investment opportunity from the point of view that there are occupiers or users of real estate. And as this flourishes and grows, so it also provides a capital appreciation for your investment going forward.
Okay, so does that mean that you find properties around airports by definition almost more interesting than others, or is that too oversimplifying?
No, I think without a doubt, in terms of the industrial logistics warehouse space, the frame of reference is always proximity to a port, whether it's an airport or a seaport. And being in Johannesburg, as an example, inland airport becomes the most crucial component. So again, I think it provides an opportunity for economic activity and growth in economic activity, which lends itself to demand for space, and hence gives you value growth.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Moritz. Coming to you from the perspective of an airport, perhaps, because I know AIIM invest in core airport infrastructure as well as other associated businesses and services and things like cold chain and logistics infrastructure. Looking at it from the airport's perspective, why is real estate development important?
Thanks, Marcel. You've really covered it all earlier, so I'll try not to be too repetitive, but maybe just quickly for context, we invested in an airports platform called SIGUP. You saw some of the investments there on the slide earlier. That was the original Libreville concession, which expired by now. and was still operating the airports of Abidjan and Congolese airports of Brazzaville and Point Noir. That's in partnership with Aegis. And a couple of years ago, we started a partnership with Zanzibar Airport Authority, which was also mentioned earlier, which we're quite excited about, where SIGAP's providing technical services. So we have a number of investments in the area, but since our investments around 6 years ago in the platform, we looked at a number of opportunities in African airports. And very often what we find is economic feasibility is a challenge. Airports measured by traffic are quite small compared to some of the international benchmarks. So one needs to find ways to make them economically viable. We talked about right sizing, I think a couple of years ago at Aviadef. You can downsize some of the investment like a terminal, but you can't say I've got less traffic, so I'll build a shorter runway. That's obviously determined by the aircraft types that you want to land at your airport. So investing or including real estate property as part of the airport model can provide an additional revenue stream that can make an airport investment feasible that's maybe otherwise not feasible. The other point you mentioned in your presentation earlier is if we have a certain traffic volume, one way to recover your investment is obviously by pushing up fees, but we already see African airports in terms of their aeronautical fees, passenger fees, aircraft fees are quite expensive. So bringing in additional revenue sources can help reduce passenger fees, which is in everyone's interest.
Right. So developing real estate at an airport is good business for the airport, as well as for the real estate investor, perhaps. Errol, you mentioned looking for a close relationship with airports. How do you see then the role between the real estate developer or investor and the airport? How does that work together?
Yeah, thanks. I think that is absolutely critical. You know, in my mind, you kind of have the investment case on the one side in terms of fundamentals associated with investment, but all of that depends on the people. And as much as, you know, we're in the real estate business, we're in the people business, because it's the people that turn the cogs, that make the investments, that benefit from the investments that we have. So having that strong relationship with like-minded individuals who have a similar and aligned value system, who have a reputation that precedes them in terms of being ethical and good businessmen, certainly aligns yourself with wanting to do business with those type of partners. And it is a partnership, you know, it isn't a one-sided relationship, it must be a win-win situation for both parties.
Sure, sure. Khangi, I'm sure that's music to your ears in terms of the partnership between the investor, developer, operator, and the airport. How crucial is it for you?
Well, I suppose you say that in your capacity as NACO and how closely we work with your team in South Africa. It's absolutely crucial. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, you know, the synergy between the different stakeholders is a major challenge in Africa, but exceptionally important. I mean, Swissport, we're a Swiss company. We want to innovate. We want to be the best in class, not just operationally, but even as far as innovation and technology is concerned. And you know the journey we've been on to digitize and automate our processes to operate at an efficient level, to reskill, you know, our employees all over the continent. But in order to do that, we have to take a step back to take a step forward, because often the infrastructure is not in place, right? And sometimes we feel that I think the operators within the airport environment are outpacing the rate of development that happens within airports. And for that, we need partnerships. So we do need to take a step back to understand what is the country's plans, what are the airport's plans, and who are the various stakeholders, and to understand what everybody is, what everybody's part in the process is. And that does involve talking to the various stakeholders, whether it be airport planners, whether it be route development planners, whether it be the airport authority itself, and to understand what everybody's goals are, because with aviation in Africa in particular, it is an area that we're all able to influence, but we cannot work in silos to get there, right? So it can't just be what Swissport wants. It has to be what is in the best interest of the entire aviation industry in that particular country, which we need partnerships to be able to execute on that.
Yeah, yeah. So specifically looking at an airport then, if you're looking to invest in facilities or operate facilities at an airport, what do you really expect from the airport when you approach them or when they approach you? What's the conversation like? What are the key topics that you put on the table at an early stage?
Well, I think a solid understanding of what they're planning strategically, to have the right buy-in from the right sources, whether it be from the Minister of Transport, whether it be from the Civil Aviation Authority. The airports companies are important gatekeepers as well in the industry. So to have a clear plan in terms of what it is they would like to achieve. We spoke a bit earlier as well in a bilateral discussion that it's often also important that we don't come and impose. We sort of understand what it is that they're trying to achieve, and then we go back to the drawing board as Swissport and say, this is what we're able to do, this is what we're prepared to invest. I mean, we have shareholders, we belong to a group, we have budgets that we have to meet, and then the discussion evolves. Generally, it does mean that things tend to take a lot more time, but I think it's the correct approach because then, we have a real chance at influencing the lay of the land for the industry as a whole if we approach things that way.
Yeah, makes sense. And Moritz, you and I have spoken about this issue of the partnerships and the skills and the capacity that need to be available on the parts of various stakeholders to make real estate development happen. What's your view on how airports approach this, or perhaps should approach this?
No, that's a very good point. And we're investors in airports and in infrastructure, so we're not property developers. The concept of developing real estate around the airport makes a lot of sense, but it brings additional investment requirements, but also complexity and a different skill set that's required. So I think we've got a good team sitting here on the panel. So as airports will have to bring in the expertise and capacity, and that can be done in different ways, either through hiring people with the capacity, working with an advisor like yourself, or bringing in a dedicated property developer as a partner. So there's different ways to do it, but certainly one needs to bring in the additional skill set to master the task. And then there's obviously, you can do it the other way around. Mark presented earlier the Cape Winelands opportunity, which was almost started with a real estate mindset and then brought in additional expertise in terms of airport operators and airport staff. So different ways to do it, but in the end, you'll need to bring in the skill set and capacity.
Right. And indeed, we have a lot of those skills and capacity here on the panel. Errol, how do you see your role as a developer in partnering with an airport? What do you bring to the table that might benefit the airport besides the investment, the money?
Yeah, so I think case in point is there needs to be a complementary skills contribution. So, the airport needs to come with its skills and benefits, as does whatever developer or development that takes place. Needs to bring their skills to it. And it's this combination of skills and expertise that hopefully gives you a winning recipe at the end of the day in terms of what to achieve. But I think, also just from an investment point of view in terms of real estate, it means that you're having an occupier space, generating a revenue stream for you. And as with any investment, there's a holding period associated with it. And given that holding period, you're bound to have more than one occupant occupying that space during the duration of that holding period. So it's important to ensure that the product that you actually build and develop at the end of the day appeals to more than just one user. Otherwise, it can be quite a costly exercise to convert to each occupant's specific requirements. So yeah, I think having the expertise and the knowledge in terms of working with occupiers of space, tenants, and having an established portfolio where one has relationships with different occupiers across the spectrum, you might be able to bring parties to the table who could benefit from the investment.
Right. As such an occupier of space, Khangi, how do you see this? I'm sure you would love to have all facilities designed specifically for you and your operations. That's probably not what Errol is thinking in terms of the long-term suitability.
No, I think there can be a combination.
Yeah.
So with partnering with your occupier, you can come up with something in a win-win situation, without a doubt.
Yeah. Your view on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously in an ideal environment, we'd like to just walk in as tenants and walk into a state-of-the-art facility, and be very investment light on our part and just bring in, the operational skills, etc. But generally, things don't work like that. I mean, luckily, we do have access to a global network of experts in the field. And I think we're very lucky, from Swissport point of view in terms of that. So we don't really rely on the landlord, except to just provide the space. Everything else we do in-house for ourselves. So I think it depends. It depends also on the size of the opportunity. If it's a larger warehouse has different requirements. A shared warehouse has different requirements to where you can have dedicated warehousing for various airlines, for various types of operations. So I think it really just depends. There's no specific criteria in terms of what the best setup will be.
Right.
But I think generally we prefer not to be landlords. We prefer just to be a tenant. But, you also need a very level playing field in terms of access to opportunities, to access those warehouses and to be able to then become a tenant or even acquire a warehouse. But hopefully, we tend to prefer to be lease light. I mean, we've explored various models in various parts of the world. I think we've tried everything. We've built warehouses, we've refurbished warehouses. We're on an extensive investment and renovation drive currently in Johannesburg, and it will extend to our other stations within South Africa. So I think for us, it just depends on what the opportunity looks like.
Yeah. No airport is the same as another. No opportunity is the same as another. You really need to tailor it to the specific situation. Going back to your earlier point about really understanding the market, the customers that are there, be it your airlines, be it the tenants. I think that's a very good
Exactly.
point.
And neither do we expect every airport to operate the same. I just think it's important that the rules are clear and transparent for everyone, and it's a level playing field, right?
Sure.
And the rest we do, right? We wouldn't be, I suppose, a global company if we weren't able to tap into the expertise we have for different scenarios. And I think in Africa, you have to keep an open mind because countries are also on different levels of growth, and their growth trajectory doesn't look the same. And I think it's also a great opportunity for international companies to come in and partner. But you have to be a real partner as well, and not just, have your wish list, but also be intentional about how you see the opportunity and hopefully invest long-term in that partnership as well. Yeah. I think it's a great business case even for the airlines when they see great brands at the airports and they see great synergy amongst operators and the airports. I think it gives them real comfort, even in terms of the choices to fly.
Yeah. That's perhaps a good link to a next question. International companies, you mentioned different opportunities in the African continent, but countries being at different levels of development. You all operate to some degree internationally across Africa. Perhaps starting with you, Errol, what do you see as some of the key opportunities across the continent from a real estate perspective linked to aviation?
So, without doubt, we've said that the aviation real estate component is a unique investment opportunity. I think one does have to differentiate between on-airport versus off-airport, given the requirement from a real estate investor point of view to have security of tenure, because without that security of tenure, you're at risk in terms of your capital investment. Real estate traditionally is a very capital-intensive investment, so you need to have a longer holding period. So, if you're off airport, you could probably own. If you're on airport, the likelihood is you have to lease, and that's where the partnership comes in with the particular airport, along with the occupier, because there's benefits obviously for the likes of Swissport to be on airport as opposed to be off airport. I think that's critically important for us. In terms of further into Africa per se, we don't really have exposure into Africa per se. And I think, possibly, we may be able to assist in terms of skills contribution, but I doubt very much from an investment opportunity that we would be active out of Africa from a property ownership or a real estate ownership point of view.
Okay, that's good to know. Moritz, from your perspective, you operate across Africa, you operate across different industries, aviation, but also others. Where do you see the big opportunities?
Look, I think there are plenty of opportunities because so little has been developed to date. If you look at airports, I mean, there's obviously some facilities around logistics, but a lot of opportunities still. You mentioned temperature-controlled logistics, hotels, etc. The list is very long. So I think the fact that there's little to date brings a big opportunity. But also, there are a number of challenges. We talked about it earlier in the preparation, but I think one of the big challenges is availability of land. And I'll speak about it from the perspective of a concession structure as a private investor, where there's now a question of, do you have land available within your concession perimeter? And you mentioned it off airport, on airport, because that can be a challenge if you don't have the land available or have it available at the right price. So that's obviously the flip side.
Yeah. On airport, off airport, you mentioned space is an important commodity in your business. Where do you see challenges in terms of availability of land, or do you see plenty of space available? What does that mean in opportunities for Swissport on airport versus off airport?
Well, because we're in the cargo business, particularly in South Africa and other parts of Africa, we're in both passenger as well as cargo. We obviously know the old story about aviation, that cargo was always the neglected side of the business. So I think there is a bit of a backlog in terms of infrastructure, particularly in Southern Africa. So there's still a lot to be done in terms of on-airport space, but definitely I think second-line facilities are becoming increasingly important. I mean, you mentioned earlier the opportunity about Africa. The opportunity about Africa, obviously the African Continental Free Trade Area is a great catalyst. And from that, we know that there's going to be a lot of change, and we start to see it. I mean, we have Amazon that just came into the country. The way Amazon currently operates in Africa, or in South Africa specifically, compared to in other parts of the world, tells us that, very soon, hopefully, we might have Amazon Airlines coming to, South Africa, and that means something for the rest of us who operate in that space. So I think at the moment, the preference obviously is to see a lot of development into the infrastructure of on-airport facilities. And over time, and I think it will happen faster than we even expect, I think those second-line facilities will become even increasingly important to link both to the airport cargo operations as well. And maybe just to take it a step further in terms of the opportunities we see in Africa, as an African, I think the young people that we have here are a great opportunity for us. The ability to create specialized skills and create talent in the African continent, given how young the population is, also does mean that we need to be very concerted in our efforts and very intentional if we want to grow the aviation industry in Africa, because we need to find a way of keeping these skills locally so that you do have a bunch of young people who would have attended an AviaDev and can then become, employees or employers or consultants for the rest of Africa, because we've been able to retain a lot of that African knowledge on the continent, rather than constantly importing those skills from elsewhere.
Very interesting point. I think it links to what we were talking about, the need for specialist expertise in not only airport operations, but also real estate development, and linking that to the population situation in Africa being a very fast-growing population, a very young population. I mean, the two present a huge opportunity together, of course, so that's great. Looking at the time, I think we should be wrapping up and leaving maybe a minute or two for one or two questions. But before we wrap up, I wanted to ask each of you, from your experience in developing real estate at or on airports, from your own perspectives, what would be a key learning that you've had that you would like to share with the audience here? Any airports in the audience that are thinking, I want to, reap these benefits of real estate investment at my airport? What is the one thing that you would give to them? Starting on the left-hand side, Errol.
So I think the two things are, number one is to have a aligned value set with the airport, in terms of, what their vision is in terms of their future growth. That must be aligned. And secondly, it must be the economic growth within the particular node. And airports stimulate economic growth, so those two go hand in hand in my mind.
Clear vision is one key thing I hear there. Great, thanks.
Look, I mentioned land, which in fact, there was a project to build an airport city in Abidjan, for example, which in the end didn't happen because land couldn't be sourced, let's say at least at the right price. So I think the other point to highlight would be stakeholder management, just making sure that everyone around the airport is aligned. For this proposition to be attractive, you need infrastructure. Obviously, you've got the airport as an attractive pull factor, but there needs to be a road, proximity to the city, maybe rail. Mark mentioned some in his presentation earlier. So getting stakeholders involved to make sure regulations right, tax incentives are right, land rights are dealt with. So I think that's a critical factor in the development.
Great, thanks. Khangi, from your perspective?
Yeah, just to emphasize what everybody else has said, clear vision, stakeholder alignment. I think, one of the most important slides in yours and Nelly's presentation earlier was the process flow on the leadership and who the various stakeholders are and how to know what everybody's role is. I think that quadrant is such a useful tool because it's very important to know if you're talking to the right people. And I think we cannot emphasize that enough. It helps projects move along a lot quicker, but it also helps investors make their decisions and be more committed in the process. And then, of course, personally, for us as Swissport, infrastructure. Very important, the quality of infrastructure, and that it should never get delayed or, they should never take too long to upgrade facilities. And it doesn't have to be just the airport. The airport can, there are various stakeholders who would be willing to participate. We had a great presentation from Medalis just earlier where they showed all the PPP opportunities. And I think it's a great slide to present at a forum like this so that everybody can see what the opportunities are. So it need not be the job of the airport to ensure that the infrastructure is at a certain level. I think you'd be surprised at how many investors out there are keen to participate in such projects.
Great. Thank you very much. We need a clear vision. You need to engage your stakeholders in a proper way, and you need to make sure that your infrastructure, through whatever means, is up to scratch for real estate investments to take off. I think those are excellent takeaways. I'll have a quick look at John. Can we take time for one question? Okay.
Anybody want to ask
Anyone
a question?
in the audience?
I have the mic. If not, you can grab these guys.
I'm sure all of you will be around for the next 3 days, so don't hesitate to come up to any of us and ask the question that you don't want to ask here in the room. Although I do see one question here. John? Over here, right at the front. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was actually Elise Peterson is my name. I'm from the Airports Company, Namibia Airports Company. I just wanted to ask, Africa is such a developing nation, continent, and everybody sees all these opportunities, and we just want to run. Is there anything that the more experienced presenter can tell us? How did post-COVID affect the way your business plan and how you were going forward? And did you notice any change in the approach by either airlines or investors into airports post-COVID?
Okay, thank you. Any of you?
Yeah, look, COVID from an aviation perspective was the biggest downside event in aviation's history. So it took some time to recover. I think generally there isn't much that has changed. You mentioned earlier, and we talked about it 2 years ago, there was an attempt to try bring other business models in, focus more on cargo, but that in itself, it helps, but it doesn't replace passenger traffic. Obviously, building infrastructure or real estate around the airport can help to bring in some more recurring revenue, but ultimately, as an airport, the core strategy is bringing planes, bringing passengers in, and within our portfolio, the attempt was to try bring airlines back as quickly as possible, and events like this help a lot in doing so.
Great. All right.
Marcel, no, we do have one more. The Executive Director of the Namibia Civil Aviation Authority, Ms. Tosca Sem, is going to ask a question. Tosca?
Thank you so much, John. I just have a particular question. Considering most of the African airports are located kilometers outside the city, and this question is basically directed to real estate, how real estate investment becomes really a feasible option, considering obviously the transport nodes, as well as economic activities that will then be tied in terms of airport development. One of those key aspects that such airports should basically consider to make a viable real estate model in terms of airports to be less reliant on aeronautical charges, and also to build that hype of activity, because COVID-19 taught us a good lesson that our airports was closed. But have we opted to have a converse in terms of promoting more real estates? Airport management could then survive.
Great question. Thank you. I understand that then relates to airports that are not necessarily located city center with a very natural or obvious real estate development opportunity. Errol, is that something you'd like to comment on?
It's a good question. I think, without a doubt, location is the mantra for real estate. And the reason why it's so important from an investor point of view is because if you're in a high need node, a node which is densely occupied, it means that when one particular tenant vacates for whatever reason, there's another tenant who would want to occupy the space. So, from an investment point of view, you need to have positive cash flow in terms of your capital investment over the holding period. And by ensuring that you are located in the right node, it means there's a constant need for somebody to occupy that space. When you divorce yourself from a economic node, it becomes a bit more challenging. However, as we said earlier, an airport is a very specialized hub. It creates a network opportunity. And because of that, there are people, and the people create demand for aspects. And that's why at airports you have retail components, you have parkades, you've got a host of different real investment uses that one could capitalize on. And invariably you find, if you just take our Tambo as an example, when it started out 30, 40 years ago, it was in the middle of nowhere. And over time, and I guess this is with the other part of real estate, it is a time-consuming investment. It's not a quick fix. And over time, these things will develop. And unless you stake your claim early on, you're going to be paying a higher price as you go along.
Great.
If I may, can distance not also be a positive factor in that it just enables different opportunities for, I don't know, the example, a hotel, where you then just create a different scope of your investment?
Absolutely. Conference center, exactly.
Great. I hope that gives you some insights. With that, I'd like to thank you
Marcel,
all.
one final comment.
Oh, wow.
Sorry, you don't even know where I am, do you?
I don't know.
You've got to try and find me.
You're very generous with
over
the time.
on the left,
John.
on the
That's
left.
great.
No, Mr. Get Desta, the Chief Commercial Officer of Eswatini Air, has just got a quick comment, and then we'll close up. Sure.
Thank you, John. Thank you. An excellent panel, very informative. Thank you. My question is just a follow-up. It was supposed to be a follow-up on the earlier question about generating non-aeronautical revenue. Airport attractiveness is being measured in terms of the quality time people have at an airport. Usually, when you are rushing to catch your flight in crowded airports, the value proposition for the people who are renting there goes down because people are rushing from flight to flight. They have to go with the latest developments in the industry you have self-connecting passengers. So they have to go get their bag, recheck, go through immigration and whatnot, which takes away the connecting free time, the dwell time that they would have gone and spent at a restaurant or a facility like that. So what is the latest design for airports in terms of facilitating self-connecting passengers? Because if they have to go through that process all over again, they are not going to spend a lot of time for those who are interested in the real estate. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. If I may, I think it speaks to a very a conundrum in aviation, is that, of course, you want to make travel as efficient and quick as possible, while at the same time you want to retain people at your airport to make use of the dwell time and get them to spend money at the facilities that you offer. So it is definitely a challenge. What I would say that in terms of real estate, the reason we are talking about real estate is that it offers an opportunity for airports to diversify away from that reliance on the passenger. So the non-aeronautical revenue that you derive maybe from cargo real estate, or maybe from a hotel facility located at your airport, does not necessarily have to be linked to the dwell time of the passenger in your airport. However, for real estate, and particularly concession opportunities in the terminal building, of course, you're very much reliant on the passenger, and there it's the balance to strike between getting them through your airport as quickly as possible versus keeping them there to hope they spend some money. I hope that gives you a little bit of direction on the question. Any views from the real estate perspective?
So without a doubt, retail talks to dwell time. You know, the more you dwell within a retail facility, hopefully the more money leaves your purse and goes to the retailer. But I think the other component is convenience. And, you know, convenience doesn't necessarily just talk to retail. We know that airports and air flights are subject to weather conditions, and very often there are delays. And, you know, if there is a delay, what amenities are there which will facilitate a convenient stay for you whilst you're waiting for your flight?
Yeah.
I think it's also, to a degree, a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you've got better offers at your airport, then people are incentivized to maybe come a bit early, grab a coffee, do some shopping, buy some gifts for the family or so. So I think it also goes hand in hand. The better the facilities, the more time people are willing to spend.
Yeah. And perhaps from the ground handling perspective, you are, of course, in the business of getting people through the airport as quickly as possible. Sure. But you need real estate, you need facilities to be able to do that.
Sure. I mean, we also have airport lounges, which, you know, I think the model around that has changed so much over time. There's so many interesting things you can do around that. I mean, I always say the airport lounge is the beginning of your holiday, really. And people have explored various retail offerings and partnering, you know, with lodges. You know, you can go, you know, very far in terms of your food and beverage offering as well at the airport, whether it's through, you know, tenants or through the lounge itself. But like Marcel said, I think there's various models that you can explore around that. But I think you're also best placed to provide more detail on that to the gentleman.
Okay. All right. John says no more questions. You've been generous with the time already. Thank you very much to the audience for taking the time to listen to us. And thank you very much to the panel, Errol, Moritz, Khangi.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.